Welcome to Chatham House. Welcome to the next stage of the U.S. presidential election. Oh my God. It doesn't matter how long you think you see something coming, when it happens, it is still a truly extraordinary moment. I don't know how much anybody on the panel has slept. I'm sure Heather hasn't slept. I think Heather was on a plane from Los Angeles to Washington when the news broke. We had already planned this panel, I have to confess. However, it has developed, as you can imagine. We have extraordinary speakers, not least our chair of Chatham House, Brahma Maddox, but we have an extraordinary set of speakers here. Let me say a very quick word about each of them before we immediately begin. John Sopel, you all know, was BBC North America editor, now leads News Agents, the podcast with Emily Matlis. I'm sure you listened to it and have followed him covering America before that for many years. Brahma Maddox, we all know very well. You might not know that she had an American mother, lived in America for many years, wrote a book in defense of America. Peter Trubowitz, director of the London School of Economics U.S. Center, has written many books, very serious ones, on U.S. domestic politics, foreign policy, and is really one of the most significant and influential conveners of the most important conversations about America and its global role at the LSE, in London and at the LSE. Heather Hurlbert has worked for years in national security and international economics in Washington, most recently as Chief of Staff to the United States Trade Representative Catherine Tai. You finished at the end of January. Before that, I think you'd been in the Clinton administration, worked at New America with Anne-Marie Slaughter. When we came across each other and started to do a lot of convenings on questions of economics and security and the transatlantic relationship. And now Heather is a fellow at Chatham House, based in Washington. And Ambassador Tony Gardner, again, well-known to our audiences, has spoken many times before, is a well-known author, but for the purposes of this panel, important for you to understand that he was U.S. ambassador in Brussels to the European Union, appointed by President Obama, 2013 to 2017, have I got my years right? And so we have an extraordinary cast of individuals. We did last week hold an event on conservative foreign policy in which we hosted two leading former Republican officials, one from the American First Foreign Policy Institute, one from Heritage. So we are really carrying on in a very meaningful and serious way dialogues and conversations with people who are independent or people who are not independent from both sides. And this is a different kind of panel, but we do it all here and hopefully in a very meaningful way. So let me start out very quickly. Tony, you have to leave first, so I'm going to start with you. What was your response? One thing that's come up a lot, you don't necessarily have to comment on this, but I've certainly been asked the question far too many times today, why hasn't President Obama come out and endorsed Kamala Harris? I find it slightly unsettling. I don't think it's the right question. However, from where you sit, from where you stand, what was your reaction? Did the decision come too slow? Did it come too fast? Is it going to be a meaningful difference?
My reaction was relief. I was in Iceland last week trying to forget about the world, and I was being lowered down into a volcano. Didn't think about Donald Trump for a single day, but I was concerned it was taking too long. Look, it should have happened, in my view, earlier, but it's irrelevant. He made the right call. He's preserved his legacy, which in my view is a very positive legacy. I think he'll go down as one of the most consequential presidents that we have had. I was worried because with more delay, it was quite clear from the data, the polling, that he could have affected a lot of races in the Senate and the House, and his legacy might have gone down in tatters. But he's thought about the country and not himself, a very difficult decision. We all know, it's been in the press, but I've worked with him. He believes that he's been underestimated, and I like that quality about him. He's been very resilient, but he made the right call. We are where we are. I hope the party will coalesce. I think it is. That we will not have an open or contested convention, which would transmit a message of division, which we don't need given the amount of time we have left. The first indications is that we are going to coalesce around Kamala Harris, and I hope that she will choose someone, I'm sure she will, that will add to the ticket. We can all think about various names, but we know what states we need to win. So I'm happy, and this is not over. The last thing I'll say, this is not over. This is my 5th campaign. The last 3 weeks, I was inundated with calls and emails from people saying, what are you doing? This is all over. Trump's going to win. I said, I'm sorry. It wasn't over then, and it's not over now. We can win.
Thank you. And I should say, as you can tell, that in addition to having been an ambassador appointed by President Obama, clearly Tony Gardner has a position and is actively and very importantly raising for the Democratic Party. I think it's clear to be where we approach this question from. John Sopel, you are a journalist of the greatest order, and when it comes to questions of America and U.S. politics, what was your reaction? Did it come too late? Did it come too early? Was it the right decision? How's it likely to affect things?
Leslie, thank you. The one thing I have learned about covering US politics and living in the States for sort of nearly 8 years, and then coming back and still following it very closely, that it is perfectly possible to be utterly shocked to the core and not surprised. And that is how I was last night, and that is how I was when I heard about the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. You can feel utterly shocked to the core that it has happened, but not in the least bit surprised that it has. And that is what I felt when I heard that Joe Biden had pulled out of the race. I think it represents, on the upside, I think if you want Kamala Harris to win and you don't want to see Trump back in the White House, on the upside, I think the fact that Biden has pulled out, it represents a paradigm shift in politics. And anyone who says it is over, and I agree with Tony on this, it's too soon. We're 4 months away from an election. Donald Trump is now the oldest candidate in American history, and people will maybe be looking at the sentences that he can't quite finish, or the areas where he gets confused midway through and muddles people's names up. And if he's got a younger, more dynamic, more articulate candidate running against him, then that turns the spotlight on him in an unfavourable way. Just in the introductory remarks, I thought part of the reason that America kind of decided it was sick of the British and got rid of us was it didn't really believe in coronations, and that it was much better to have elections and contests. I think there is a danger that Kamala Harris gets the nomination as the result of what may be seen as a stitch-up or a behind kind of closed doors deals where power brokers in the Democratic Party say it's just not right for anyone else to contest this. We must have a clean convention in Chicago in August. Let's not go there. I think that represents a bit of a danger. I think that if there was seen to be a bit more of a debate over the future of the Democratic Party, that will be good for the Democratic Party. Let us do coronations. Let America do elections.
Very difficult after the last 3 weeks when people saw the Democratic Party as incredibly divided, bordering on dysfunctional, and the Republican Party consolidating and uniting around, admittedly, a very narrow, a very powerful agenda. President Obama, I think, in his statement, called for a process. He didn't call for an open process, but he called for an open process. It doesn't necessarily look like that's where we're heading. Heather Hurlbert, you were on a plane, I believe. You are the only person on the panel who has worked in the Biden administration, and very, very recently. So you bring a different vantage point. And how did the news strike you?
Thanks. I will start by noting that for a number of years now, it's been clear that my fellow Americans are, shall we say, coronation curious, both in our politics and in yours. But I thought, the first thing I'll say is that what you saw yesterday was President Biden retaking the initiative after, as you said, Leslie, several very painful weeks. And the staff found out only a couple minutes before the letter was released. Many found out as the letter was released, but he retook the initiative, did it on his own terms, and then, interestingly, by even not endorsing the vice president right away, but really making himself, for a moment again, the center of the action, the center of the conversation, and frankly, reminding everybody of the political skills that have left him for dead, figuratively or literally more than once over his career, and brought him back. So that, I thought, after several very painful weeks, was highly appropriate, if utterly shocking, as my plane left the ground, that he pulled it back to be all about him and not about this painful unwinding. The other two things I just quickly note is that Obama, along with Nancy Pelosi, Senator Schumer, and Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of the Democrats in the House, none of them, I believe, as of this morning, has yet endorsed. And the thinking that's been put around is that they want to be sure, to John's point, it's not seen as a coronation, or it's not seen as them picking without the larger party weighing in. So I think that explains why you've seen so many endorsements, but not those four. I do think, number one, Harris's skills as an organizer have clearly been underrated. And I think she has been very quiet and very careful these last few weeks, but she obviously has not been idle. People supporting her have not been idle. And John, as you said, I think as much as many people loved the idea of an open primary, because as you can see, and maybe this will be my last point, we have a wealth of talent among the next generation of the Democratic Party. No shortage of really interesting candidates with really diverse biographies and experiences. But having said that, I think no one had the stomach for any more chaos, given how great the concern over Trump is. And I think those two factors together, the chaos factor and the Harris organizing abilities, explain why you've seen just vast swaths of the political class fall into line. It was quite something to sit and watch the tweets come in. There's a perennial joke about Democrats in disarray. And yesterday afternoon and this morning, what you're really seeing are Democrats in array. We'll see how long it lasts.
And what you haven't said, but I think we're all taking as a given, is that a lot of it is not just the past 3 weeks, but it's for the Democrats, the looming existential threat of a second Trump presidency, which has always been a very fundamental driver of unity. I'm going to come to you last, Bronwyn, so you can have the last word on the first round. But Peter Trubowitz, you've studied U.S. domestic politics, partisanship. You've lived in Texas as well as London, and you grew up on the East Coast, so you know all of America very well as having studied it. What was your reaction?
So the first thing that ran through my head was I'm old enough to remember when LBJ in March of 1968 announced that he would not stand for re-election. And it just struck me that we had not seen anything like that since. And that fundamentally, this was different in that at that time, the concern was about the war in Vietnam, and LBJ could not see a path forward because the country had turned against the war. Here, the issue was not Biden's policies. If you look at polling, Biden's policies are popular. The issue was him. Right or wrong, he had become the issue of the campaign. And so I think, at the end of the day, he did the right thing, which was to take himself out of the equation. What has struck me about it is the implications, the immediate implications. One is he put the age kind of moniker right on Donald Trump's back. And it won't matter who the Democrats end up coronating, nominating. It won't be Joe Manchin. I gather he's now taken himself out. It'll be someone much younger. And so that's just a kind of stand-up, a setup that is quite different. But the other thing about it that struck me as really interesting, if you stop and you think about it, it changed or altered, I think, the calculus of a group of voters in the United States immediately. So these are the so-called double haters. About 20 to 25% of the voters, depending on which poll you look at, that did not want to vote for either Donald Trump or Joe Biden. And so the question was, who would they ultimately move towards, break for at the end? And what Biden has basically done is he's changed that calculus. This is not to say that it's going to be a walk for the Democrats. I agree with everything that's been said here. That is not the case. But if I'm Sherrod Brown, senator in Ohio, in a very close election, I'm breathing a lot easier today. I mean, this matters a lot for down ballot races in the United States. And if you stop and you think about it, and if you're worried about Donald Trump, what really matters for the Democrats is to hold one of the chambers. So either they hold the Senate or they take the House. They need 5 seats to pick up the House. So I think that in many ways, this has kind of like just altered the calculus for a number of voters who are, you know, maybe in interesting ways in play now. And we'll just have to wait and see.
Really important point. I mean, people kept using that word rerun. We know that the polling suggested that the level of enthusiasm amongst voters, especially on the Democratic side, was not high, very low. And this, you know, and the JD, in some ways, the JD Vance decision, right? The announcement of Trump's running mate also injected a very different kind of energy, but a lot of energy in a sign that something was going to move. It wasn't just going to be more of the same. And then you get this decision. It really feels like it's a race worth paying attention to, no matter what your preferences are. Brahma Maddox.
Thank you. And just on that point, I think you're exactly right about what the JD Vance decision did to this race. It just injected a sense of, well, game on, really, of energy, of doubling down on the Trump side, of clarity, because J.D. Vance has often longer and better words for the same things that Donald Trump does, and so you begin to get a statement there of the policy and of what the Democrats were then up against, and the significance of a win in either direction. So I think you're exactly right that energized it. When I heard it, I had that sense of release from living 2 parallel worlds. Was this the week at Chatham House where we were going to talk an awful lot about the Venezuela elections this weekend, or was it going to be the week when Joe Biden went and that blew everything else out of the water? And it was that week. And always a relief when you know which future you are in, because it does make a difference, even if it is long foretold. To me as well, there was it says something about the honesty of television, not in every domain, and that's not to make light of fake news and all this, but the world, not just his party, could not unsee what Joe Biden had done that night in the debate. Every stumble, replayed endlessly around the world, and it was impossible to shake that off. So I think it was absolutely the right decision. Absolutely on Congress, it has made his party's life easier, though not easy. On Kamala Harris, I very strongly feel that the party should not rush to anoint her. Tidiness is a great quality, but overrated in this kind of circumstance, I think. Not just that it would be seen to be a coronation or anointment or whatever metaphor you want, but also that people, when they are tested, of really having to make that argument, they change slightly. And one of the tests that everyone is going to want to see from Kamala Harris is whether she can put the words of a leader to that position. She has lots of great phrases about the US. I've seen her speak twice at the Munich Security Conference, that kind of niche event where still it is absolutely appropriate to come out with the big phrases about the United States and its place in the world. And she's done that, but I wouldn't say it was an A starring grade, that kind of performance and words that leave you walking away thinking, yes, that is it. And that is very much the kind of question you get about her. Joe Biden, I agree, his legacy is now there, cleaner of the things that were doubts about him, his own frailty, the southern border, that phrase that now hangs over American politics. So what he's done for the economy, which we're very envious over here, all those things now stand there clean. But what has she done, and what is she going to promise to do? And I think that some kind of testing, not bad to try to get more of that out of her. And there is a new generation coming through. Not just the trio of governors that we hear mentioned most often, but another trio or so after that. Not bad for the party to get its own energy. I think just the charge of the unexpected at this point. So I think for all the temptations of tidiness, of shutting down this disarray, this very telegenic disarray, still something to be said for having something of a process that allows a few more names in.
It's a very powerful comment, and I was persuaded, I think it was James Carville who a week or so ago made a pitch for 4 town halls led by President Obama, President Clinton, with 8 candidates, and run them at the end of it, come out with a candidate. It feels to me, and maybe, I'm just caught up in the moment, but it feels to me that we're just past that the party has moved on and that people have sort of decided, but maybe not. I suspect that the momentum that we're past that, but I think that there are very powerful arguments for this. I want to come on to what it means, and I'm going to come to you first, John, and I guess I want to ask a couple of questions. One is, there are a lot of questions about, and Bronwyn articulated that very well, what would she do? Can she make the case? Does she have the power of persuasion? But we all know that in a presidential election, increasingly, especially in the United States, so much of why people vote isn't really about a particular policy, although there's certainly people that are mobilized by, for example, abortion rights, inflation, all the rest of it. But so much of it is about, do I identify with you? And clearly, we've gone from a race that had 2 older, fairer-skinned men to a race where we have 1 white older man and 1 woman who's half South Asian, half Indian, and half African American. And that is a game changer for US politics. Whether it matters, well, it will matter. How it matters is very difficult to unpack, and I'm not sure we can. And obviously who she chooses matters. But if you sort of look at the question of identity, you look at the swing state question, you look at where we are, the convention starts on August 19th in Chicago. What comes next, John, and how do you imagine this unfolding, and what should we be looking for as telltale signs of the direction of travel?
So let me reverse engineer one of the questions, which is, how does Kamala do it? And reverse engineer it to pose the question, who was Donald Trump hoping to face in November? He desperately wanted it to be Joe Biden. He desperately wanted it to be the person who was old, who had a record to defend. He didn't want to fight Kamala Harris. And we don't know who the running mate is going to be. But presumably it has to be somebody. And so to your question about, what happens now and what do they need to put in place? She needs to pick a running mate who will have resonance in those key swing states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, possibly Georgia, Arizona, Nevada.
Makes you want to get a car and drive.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that those, and particularly the Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, which is seems to me the safest path to 270 electoral college votes. You've got to have somebody who will appeal there. Probably it has to be a white man. As Bronwyn was saying, there are a number of governors who would fit the bill very well. I mean, if it was to be really bold, and you were going to say misogyny doesn't exist in America, you might say Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, who has done a terrific job in that state. I think that you've got to proceed in a way that answers some of the concerns that people have about Kamala Harris. But, we mustn't assume that because Trump was pulling ahead in the polls, that he is this flawless candidate. I mean, he did not have a great debate performance against Joe Biden. It was just Joe Biden was shockingly awful. So I just think you need to keep that sense of balance, and to have a candidate who, one, raise money. And I want to add a little word about, what Heather was saying about the organizational capabilities of Kamala Harris. As I looked at it this morning, I think there were 140 or so members of the House who'd come out in support of her, 32 senators, 12 of the 23 governors that are Democrats had come out, 4 state delegations had come out in, I think, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, and New Hampshire. That is pretty mean going in less than 24 hours. It feels to me there is a juggernaut that is rolling, and she is almost virtually unstoppable now.
Tony Gardner, you've done a lot of fundraising. How does money translate into votes? I mean, it's not a direct arrow. What is your sense of, what does that tell us about what comes next? How do you see things developing? Who do you think the candidate will be? How much will it matter, the vice presidential nominee? And where do you think the race, where's the trajectory of the race? What's going to happen in November?
So, yeah, you all know that fundraising is the seamier underside of U.S. politics, but it is what it is. A lot of people were on the sidelines, I know, because I'm doing this. A lot of people just were saying, we're just going to wait. In the last 24 hours, it's changed. I mean, I'm involved in one event, and I've seen people saying, we're willing to give. And you saw the statistics, I think, of, something like 40 million or so, 47 million in the last 24 hours. So the dynamic has changed. There are a few other things I want to say about this. Donald Trump has been extremely lucky in the last week, and I don't only mean that he's survived an assassination attempt. I don't mean to be flippant, but he's been incredibly lucky. Every single thing that one could have imagined has gone his way in the last 10 days. Every single court case has gone his way. The debate is what it is, but I would say he was very lucky because his performance was not great. There are 2 fundamental questions. How do we win, and what is at stake? The point's already been made, but it's very important to say this is about 5-ish key states where the margin of error is less than 100,000 votes. That's what we're playing for. And that will influence the choice of the candidate who can bring in the votes in the key states, 5 or so, particularly, in my view, the must-win states of Michigan and Pennsylvania. What is at stake? And I want to say this because I know there's some students in this audience. I hope all of you read the Supreme Court decision on immunity, presidential immunity. I don't typically advise people to read Supreme Court decisions, but this one could go down in history as one of the most consequential decisions in the history of the country, perhaps like the ones on affirmative action, Brown versus Board of Education, which changed the United States. Read the majority opinion. Now, I'm not going to criticize the court. We're in a democracy. Courts, by the way, deserve respect, which is one thing Donald Trump doesn't accord them. They deserve respect. But the majority opinion had an opportunity to say exactly what was not an official act that deserves immunity. They could have, and they didn't. For example, is bribing a judge an official act that deserves immunity? Or, as the minority opinion, Sotomayor's opinion said, is the assassination of a political opponent. Could that possibly be an official act? Why didn't the majority opinion actually say what was not an official act? Now, just think of what was at stake. Donald Trump in a second mandate, with this opinion, how will he act? And I think the reason I say this, it will be clear to Americans, will be made clear on the campaign trail, what is at stake here. So project not only competence, but moderation, Leslie. Who is not going to burn the house down, and by the way, not burn down all of our alliances in the process? Are we going to elect someone who is a moderate, who will continue with, I think, is a fine legacy? So if we can make those 2 points, including with a VP candidate, I think we have a chance.
We're going to talk policy, but I want to get the rest of the panel's views on where this is going to go. Heather, you, in addition to being a Washington insider, have Heartland, links. I think you've got an Omaha link, as do I. You have a sense for how Americans might respond to these 2 candidates. But where do you think this is going to go? Who do you think will be the VP? How is it going to affect the outcome? Are Americans going to come out? Are they going to be nervous about a female, mixed race female leader, or are they going to be more nervous about Donald Trump, or how does this play out?
I mean, at this point, the answer, Leslie, is all of the above, right? So the trick, you know, that as was said earlier, Trump's vice presidential pick was about, number one, injecting some youthful enthusiasm, and number two, doubling down on his core values, if that's what one chooses to call them, and his core presentation to the American public, a presentation of grievance and of a call for change. Harris similarly, and I think the reasons that speculation is circling so intensely over a white governor, a white male governor, Harris will want to pick someone who doubles down on this core sense that she, as Ambassador Gardner just said, that she represents both the good that the Biden administration has accomplished, as well as a sense of moderation, of respect for the rule of law and American democracy, and encompassing, you know, a historic encompassing win, but also one that is soothing and moderate to those for whom maybe the historic aspects of it are less interesting and appealing. So then you get to the question, and the challenge in the Trump-Biden matchup always was everyone knew who they were. Many people were not particularly excited by them. And so the question was, which side would do better at turning its voters out? And which side would do better at keeping its voters motivated? The interesting thing about Harris is that potentially she motivates whole swaths of voters who previously were not very motivated. And we just don't know. We will have to see what that's going to look like. But I did think it was interesting that there was an African-American women's social organization that planned a call for 1,000 women last night and had 20,000 women get on it with 5 hours notice, had to call senior leadership at the Zoom Corporation to get a Zoom big enough to hold all of them. So there is the potential here to expand the map in some really, and the enthusiasm map, given that, as viewers probably know, US election participation is not always that high. So if you can turn people out, it really matters. And there is the potential here for her to really change the map beyond, frankly, what we thought the limits of what President Biden or President Trump could achieve. But we'll have to see whether that turns out to be real.
She's a complicated character. She's also from California, which isn't great. A lot of voters don't like that. She's wealthy, so it's not clear that she speaks to working class racial minorities. You know, there's a contest for those. The Republican Party is making some inroads, but it will be interesting to see what people map on.
Sorry, she's a former prosecutor who represents law enforcement, which we should mention sooner rather than later, because that cuts multiple ways in contemporary American politics. But it's a fascinating moment, a woman of color being the voice of law enforcement in our politics.
We've seen the prosecutor versus felon ads already. Peter, and then actually Bronwyn, let's come to you first. Where do you think this is going? What will matter most? And perhaps from from the point of view of the UK looking at this.
That begins to take us into policy, where I think it will go to Kamala Harris, although I've set out the reasons why I think a bit of a pause would be worth it for the party, but I think it will go that way. There's enough momentum behind it. Who she picks as a running mate, I'd be surprised if she picks another woman. I wouldn't exactly call it misogyny, but certainly chauvinism and nervousness. My American mother, you kindly mentioned, who moved here, was eloquent on the subject of how the US was more nervous in some domains about women's in leadership. This was some time ago than Britain. On what it looks like from here, suddenly politicians of every possible stripe are being very, very careful what they say about Donald Trump, not having been careful in the past, which is making for some comedy. But that aside, there is a real concern, and Leslie, I'm maybe bending your structure because this does take us into policy, but Donald Trump does represent something very different about America's view of itself in the world. Absolutely not an Atlanticist, not there to identify with the values that American presidents have seemed to identify with for decades, not there to uphold that set of rules and the order, but as he spins it out, really into a transactional arrangement with the world of, if you want us to protect you, then pay us. And that is very, very different. Not just different from what Joe Biden, we were discussing whether he'd be the last Atlanticist, as you put in your excellent expert comment on our website, but whether that whole philosophy was fading. So it really does represent a big difference for the US's allies. And indeed, it's one-time enemies as Trump reaches out to some of them. And it's left those countries trying to work out very fast what to do.
Peter, maybe I can use this as a moment to bring you in, and can you tell us both, a few comments on where this is going, but how much is foreign policy going to play? We know that American voters don't usually vote on foreign policy, but a lot of issues cut across. Is the rest of the world completely irrelevant to the election as things move forward? Will Kamala Harris care? Will she be worried about her relationship with the rest of the world during the rest of this campaign season? And do Americans care? Will it matter at all, the international slate of issues?
So I'd say a few things here. Some of this is maybe to echo what's been said. The first thing is, I can't remember if it was Tony or John who said this, but this is going to come down to 3 states. It was always going to come down to 3 states. It always is about 3 states. And it will be a huge mistake, a 2016 mistake, to spend one's time trying to expand the map. The focus should be on those 3 states. The Democrats have to win those 3 states. There might be other paths, maybe Arizona, maybe North Carolina. In 2016, the mistake was they stopped paying attention to what they absolutely had to win. What they got right in 2020 is they focused on what they absolutely had to win the Electoral College. That's where they need to focus. And I think if she's the candidate, what she needs to demonstrate, what she needs to do is to move to the center. So what the baggage that she carries is from the 2020 campaign, and that she ran left hard, which was a smart move for trying to win the Democratic nomination, you could say. Many do it to try to get the nomination that way. And she ran out of road very fast. But she has been hammered by that, and she will be hammered by that, by Donald Trump. If it doesn't start tomorrow, it'll start the day after. That she's too left, she's too far gone, and so forth. She needs to find a way quickly to get to the center, I think. And in particular, she needs to figure out a way to win white, male, working class voters. She's not going to win a lot of them. She has to bring Donald Trump's margins down. That's what she's got to figure out. Perhaps partly through a VP pick. I think the other way is through policies, the policies that she invokes. And just on the foreign policy, it kind of leads to the foreign policy question. I think so my feeling is that Donald Trump, in his pick of Vance, his reaching out to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. the same day he was shot with a phone call, or whatever the assassination attempt to get Bobby Kennedy to step out of the race, is because he knows that he is actually vulnerable in those 3 states. He's doubling down with Vance, but as they say, Vance will spend the election in Pennsylvania in an attempt to try to take it. And so I think if she's the candidate, that's the problem she has to solve.
Let me ask one final question, and then we'll we'll open it up. We have the visit of Netanyahu to Washington, to Congress. It's not entirely clear who he's meeting with. We've heard a lot about Michigan, which is one of the states that you're talking about. We've heard about Arab American voters being very disgruntled and dissatisfied with the Biden administration's policy and failure to restrain Israel. That's also an important constituency. It's not clear how this visit will unfold. Certainly, there's a lot of policy choices to be made, not only by Israel and by actors in the region, but also by this administration, which matters for young voters, as well as Arab American voters, and it matters in some of those states. So what do you think we will see? Maybe we could get a few. You can choose. You can self-select and who would like to weigh in on that question. What do you think we will see? Will Kamala Harris try to stake out some sort of independent voice? Is it just too soon? Or, what will we see? What should we see? Anybody want to? Tony, you look like you want to answer that question.
She's been more critical. Look, it's known that she's been more critical, discreetly critical about our policy in Gaza. But you know what? I'm going to skirt that question. I really think foreign policy is a pretty marginal issue. Yeah, you're referring to the Arab American vote, youth votes, but it's still a pretty marginal issue. What are the issues? Women's reproductive rights, right? It's prescription drugs. It's immigration. These are the issues people care about, kitchen table issues. Where are we vulnerable? It's the issue about inflation and interest rates, right? Why is my breakfast cereal costing much more than it cost 4 years ago? Why, when I fill my car with petrol, as you say here, does it cost 24 years? 24 years. Why does it cost much more than it cost 5 years ago? These are the issues people care about. Really, Ukraine, Gaza, minimal, right? So in my view, and this is the tragedy of the debate, Leslie, had I been at Camp David trying to prep the president, I would have said, Joe, just be Joe. Just be you. Just be you. Don't go on stage and regurgitate facts and statistics, which it sounded like he had been prepped to do. Just be yourself. Exude competence, rationality when you're debating against this man. And I think that's the core thing we need to do now, is to show this is rational, competence, centrist party.
You know, you just opened up something. We're not going to go down that road, but what if that debate had gone well? And then what if something else hadn't gone well a month from now? I mean, the debate is going to be read in many different ways, depending on what happens in the election. Maybe it was a good thing that this has bubbled to the surface at this point in time. But I do want some reactions, because I guess the broader question that we need to get at, and then we're going to come immediately to the audience, is if Kamala Harris does secure the nomination, if she were to be President of the United States of America, the first woman, would things look any different, or would it be basically more of the same in terms of Biden's foreign policy? And, the things that might change and move the needle would be things outside of the country rather than her in particular. Anybody want to?
Well, I just wanted to say that I sort of agree with Tony and I disagree with Tony. Of course, foreign policy is going to be an absolutely marginal issue in this election. It always is. It gets talked up before election. You get close to the election, and it's kitchen table issues. It's the price of goods at the supermarket, how much it costs to fill your trolley, etc. But I always thought the way that it was framed, that this is a choice between Biden and Trump, and people won't want Trump, therefore they will vote for Biden, framed it wrongly. I think there were an awful lot of people for whom the alternative was sitting on the couch and not going to vote. And I think the numbers were increasing all the time of people who were prepared to sit on the couch all the time that Biden looked like he was failing. And those are young people, and those are people who were upset about the issues of Gaza. And I think that with Kamala Harris, even a minor reset in the policy direction could have a profound impact on the number of young people who go out to vote. The large Arab American population that live kind of on the suburbs of Detroit, where you've got a very big concentration of Arab Americans. Look, if we're saying that these states, small margins make a difference, then you play for small margins.
Any other Brahman, on the foreign policy or on this
I
particular issue?
don't think foreign policy is going to affect this election very much. I mean, Gaza is marginal, but we are talking the margins in these key states. I still don't think that there would be anything so dramatically different on the campaign trail between what she said and what Trump says, that people would vote on that basis. They could, in practice, make quite a difference, and I worry about what Trump in particular might bring to the situation between Israel and the Palestinians, which sort of might be some days heading to a sort of interim deal, and that's the most optimistic you can say, but there are a lot of ways in which he could make it worse and make any even talk of a deal out of court absolutely fanciful. But no, she's going to be pushed hard on what she will say about the southern border and about immigration. She was in charge of that for years, and it is a very hard problem in any country, but one the US at the moment is not on top of.
Peter?
I mean, the only thing I would add here, and it doesn't, I think foreign policy will only figure in, well, first of all, there are events that happen and stuff could happen between now and November that just changes everything. You know that, I mean, we could get like an October surprise where Putin is nuclear saber rattling or something. But I think where foreign policy issues intersect with domestic issues like interest rates and employment and inflation, it will matter. And so I expect Donald Trump to hammer the China issue in this campaign. And Kamala Harris, or whoever the Democrat is going to have a response to that. I mean, I think Biden has a record that she can run on there. But I would expect that to be pretty much on the foreign policy side, the issue, because it's so interwoven, especially in these swing states, with economic opportunity and fortunes there.
Heather, I have to say, it does feel like it's going to be a really nasty campaign, I imagine, an extremely nasty campaign, and probably worse than it might otherwise have been. Heather, did you want to say something on that? And then if you sort of put your hands up.
No, it's going to be a tremendously nasty campaign. On Gaza, Harris is perceived as having had more empathy and concern for Palestinian civilians, for Gazan civilians. I think that will continue. On the other hand, she will be sitting on the dais behind Netanyahu when he speaks in Congress this week, so she won't move very much. But exactly balancing that middle act will be a very interesting early test of her statesmanship. And while I, of course, agree that no specific foreign policy is going to draw votes in the election, the question of leadership, for which perception overseas and action overseas is often shorthand, is going to matter a lot given who these two candidates are. So in an odd way, I actually think international questions will be quite important. I think Bronwyn has mentioned immigration very rightly as an issue that is uncategorizable between foreign and domestic politics. And just my last, Leslie, point is that while the Biden administration has made changes at the border that have gotten entry numbers down very dramatically over the last 6 months, they haven't gotten credit for it. And it will be interesting to see whether a new face is able to, in a funny way, claim credit more effectively for Biden's policies than Biden was able to do himself.
Thank you. We'll come out to the audience. Please raise your hand very high and introduce yourself and ask your question. The woman here with her hand, yes.
Hello, my name is Lucy Pearson. I'm a student at the University of Birmingham, and my question is for Mrs. Sobel. Just as in the UK, much of the vote for the Labour Party was anti-conservative, to what extent is it possible that support from inactive voters in the US, who may choose the Democrats, is it anti-Republican rather than pro-Democrat? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I'm not sure I'm best qualified to answer, but let me have a stab at it. I think that in 2020, it was undoubtedly true that there was a strong anti-Trump majority in America, that people were sick of the noise, of the discord, of the chaos and the mayhem, and that they just wanted someone who seemed to represent order and calm. And I think that the fact that it was during COVID as well played to Joe Biden's advantage, because he could sit in Scranton, sit in Delaware and be at home in the basement, not campaigning, looking like he was being sensible and following COVID advice. I think that was true of 2020. I think it was true as well of the most recent general election in the UK, where it was clearly strong anti-Tory sentiment that led to Keir Starmer winning the big majority. I think that if this election had become a referendum on Joe Biden and a failing Joe Biden, then Biden was set to lose. And if you can make it about Donald Trump, then I think the Democrats are in with much more of a chance.
Anybody else want to say something on that before I come back out? Tony?
Well, just one point. I agree with that. But I don't think this can be just about, voting against something. It has to be voting for something. And one of the reasons for that is that people's views about the first Donald Trump administration have changed dramatically. They seem to recall that everything was great under the first term. But back then, they didn't seem to think it was all that great. But people tend to rewrite history in thinking that he is the best steward of the economy, and we had no wars and so on. So it's got to be, it has to be a positive image, not just voting against something.
And there is a sense, so there are a few questions here about, where does Kamala Harris stand on the ICJ? Where does she stand on Gaza? Where does she, there is a sense of people not necessarily knowing what she stands for, because as we know, she's been kept in the shadows for much of the last several years in this administration. Susan, you had a question. And then Olivia. We'll take these two.
First of all, in terms of the notion of a coronation, I just wanted to say, because of the way the campaign is funded, I don't think that they can pass the funding and the campaign money that they have over to any candidate other than Harris. So it's lovely to talk, but there is an infrastructure there that's enormous. There are, hundreds of offices in those swing states that you're talking about the importance of, that potentially could have to be closed down if Harris were not the candidate. So I think some of the coalescing has to do with that. I think that the practicalities, one of the reasons why we supposedly lost the '68 election is because we didn't actually think about some of those practicalities when you start late. So anyhow, I just wanted to mention that. It's interesting to me with Gaza, because that was the issue du jour and I don't mean it in a that it's not an important thing, but I found Bernie and AOC's endorsement in the last couple of weeks, and I think Ilhan Omar's as well, of Biden, really interesting in that context. So it just shows that people are sort of understanding in the end that they might end up much worse off in other situations. So I think that people are kind of not quite understanding some of the edges of the party. And I just wondered, Kamala's problem, I forget which of you were talking about it, but Kamala's problem seemed to be in 2020 that she flipped left. Right. I think that, yeah, when she really is much more centrist. And so the reality of it is perhaps, and I wonder what you guys think about it, the fact that her core is more centrist might make it easier than some people think.
Okay, I'm going to come to Olivia. Take a couple more. Here.
Thank you. Olivia O'Sullivan. I direct our UK in the World programme here at Chatham House. And I think my question follows pretty directly on from Heather's last point. It seemed like the thesis of the Biden administration has been white working class populations in deindustrialized heartlands felt abandoned and left behind by globalization. And the way to win them back from populists is to onshore industries, subsidize jobs, deliver economically, and that will win out over identity issues that Trump appeals to. I'm just curious, if it's Kamala, firstly, that doesn't seem to have been working in electoral terms. Biden doesn't seem to be getting credit for his economic results. Maybe that's wrong. If it's Kamala, will she be able to claim that mantle, or because she is a woman of color, are identity issues just going to start to become even more acute compared with whatever economic track record she can say she has as vice president? Thank you.
And then I think there was one over here. Yes, in the front row. Sorry.
Hello, my name's Bruno Van Sant. I'm a student at the University of Exeter. And my question is, to what extent is Trump's decision to choose a man in J.D. Vance as his VP instead of Nikki Haley, who could have widened his voter base, be construed as a missed opportunity given Harris's likely ascension?
Please, who wants to weigh in on that? Bronwyn, would you like to? Because these two are having a side
I'm conscious
chat.
of all the hands in the front as well. Let me say just briefly on that last point. He's doubling down. He's not trying to widen the base. He's saying this is a movement. This is MAGA. Come join us. But it's very much us, not trying to appeal across the country. So you're right. In theory, there is a vulnerability there, but there is, as Leslie was saying at the beginning, such an energy of concentration, of intensity, if you like, of the single message, that he has that going for him this week.
Tony, I know you need to leave. We're going to carry on for a few more minutes, but thank you so much for doing this, and we will have you back. I'm going to take, before you decide who's going to answer, I'm going to take the question right here in the front row, too, to add to it. Make sure we get that in the mix. Thank you. Right here in the front row, right there. Right.
I'm from Democrats Abroad in Chatham House, and I really feel good about coming here today because I was very negative before, but you seem to be very pro-Democratic, and you think, oh, well, let me just get Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, those 100,000 people, and everything's going to be fine. Actually, it's not over yet. So let's imagine that we do get in the White House again. How many of you think that there will be a MAGA positive reception to that, and will Trump just hand over, his people and say, okay, now we're no?
I'm glad you've asked that question. I think it's an extremely important question, and one that we need to pay a lot of attention to. I think the UK government is really not got its mind. It's not only about the British government, but it certainly is something that the British government should be thinking about. What do you do during a transition period? Peter, you want to take some of these?
So I'm going to start with the last question. It's a great question. I mean, MAGA will not go away if the Democrats win. The country is deeply divided. It's polarized. And this has international implications, because while many people right now, many international leaders or America's allies and friends might feel, well, at least there's a chance, there's another internationalist now who's going to head the ticket and so forth. I think when they look at the United States, they see that, America's commitments I think the takeaway is they cannot be relied on to the same degree that was true some time ago, because it could easily flip from one election to the next. And I think so the division, the dysfunction, the polarization really matters. But so does winning an election, and winning this election. I mean, Tony didn't say this, but when he was talking about the Supreme Court, the next president is there's a decent chance that the next president will be able to fill 3 seats. Maybe. But, so, I mean, there's a chance to remake the court or to consolidate the whole, yes. So I mean, so while that's true, I think the larger point here is you've got to have a strategy once you're in office where you're thinking beyond your immediate constituency. And to be fair to Biden, I think he did that with the infrastructure bill. Plenty of that money has gone to red states and red districts, and he just let it rip, and got criticized within his own party for it. But it's the right move. It's the right move politically, socially, economically. To go to the point that was raised just quickly, and then I'll stop. I mean, it kind of dovetails here on the economic policies, and are they working politically? I think they are for the Democrats, and the proof, I think, is in the down ballot races. So if you look at Michigan, you look at Ohio, you look at Pennsylvania, you look at those races where the Democrat, the senator or representatives, were running ahead of Joe Biden. They were running on Biden's policies. The problem was not Biden's policies. I mean, the border is a complicated issue, but on many issues, whether it was prescription drugs and trying to cap and lower them, or spending on infrastructure and bringing jobs, or green investment as well, those things were popular. I mean, I'm not just making this up. You can just go and look at the polls. They're very, very clear on this. The problem was the president. I mean, for whatever set of reasons. And so he had people down ballot. He's got people down ballot who are running ahead of him. And where the rubber hit the road this last month is where they started to see themselves sinking, where the policies couldn't help them.
Heather, did you want to come in on any of these questions? Not least, what happens if the Democrats win? Is there a peaceful transition from one party to the next, or one party, within the party?
I'm very worried about the transition because I think the Republican base has been led to believe that any election that doesn't result in Trump returning to the White House is not fair. So I'm enormously worried about that, and we all need to be thinking about how to prepare for it. So that's one. I also wanted to come back to Olivia's question and make the point that we had seen in recent months Trump running up his numbers among people of color as well as white men. So I think we actually don't, Democrats don't have the luxury of viewing this as a white working class men issue. And the really interesting both challenge and opportunity for Harris or anybody else is going to be to make an appeal that both captures people in their identities, but also transcends them. And that's an enormous challenge for her or for anyone, but it's what in different ways our last three presidents have all done successfully. So that's the assignment.
Please.
I just wanted to come in on I agree. Do we think that Donald Trump on November the 6th, if he's lost the election, is going to say, yep, I lost fair and square? No, that is not going to happen, sadly. However, I do think there were circumstances unique in 2020 with the kind of vast increase of numbers of people voting by post, by mail, when actually the Republican Party was stupidly and foolishly saying, don't vote by mail, it's not safe, when so many of their elderly kind of supporters wanted that. I don't think those factors are there this time round. And just on the voting record since Biden's been in office, actually, it's been pretty good. And you look at the midterm elections, and the Republicans were going to sweep the House and all the rest of it. It didn't happen. And the other thing I would just add to that is that where women's reproductive rights have been on the ballot, and I think they've been on the ballot in Kansas, rock-red Republican state, in Kentucky, in Ohio, every time that has been a central issue, a woman's right to choose has prevailed. And Kamala Harris, for whatever criticisms there have been of her, has been absolutely forceful on this, and I'm sure will seek to make this a central issue, particularly when J.D. Vance is even more out there than Trump. He is more MAGA than Trump on abortion, on the border, on kind of protectionist economic policies and the like. And I think that is an opportunity that Kamala Harris could exploit.
I'm going to take one more round, so please raise your hands high. I'm not going to get to all of them, but So the woman in the back.
Hello, I'm Jalen Wrench. I attend the University of Central Florida. My question is, I've asked my friends back home, people back home, and they tell me that they would vote for Biden because they're voting against something. Now you ask them, they say they vote for Kamala because they're still voting against something. Why haven't we collectively chosen the third party?
Okay, gentleman right here.
Hi, Dominic Carrotty. Great debate, by the way. Quick question to follow up the last couple of points. Is it all Trump going to claim it's about strong man? He wants to portray himself as a strong man against Biden or Harris. And we need a strong man. And secondly, given the forebodings about whether Trump accepts the election result, how close is America to imploding in some sort of civil...
I didn't catch that last bit.
How close
Is America to imploding, some sort of civil insurrection or whatever?
And then just here in the middle row, you can choose. Sorry. There you go.
Yeah.
Oh, that was so kind.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Human. I'm a PhD researcher on financial crime with focus on Russia, China, and Iran. I was wondering how the election will change the sanctions policy of the United States over these countries. Thank you.
Let's let the person right next to you ask the question.
Thank you. That's very nice. Jasmine El Gamal. I'm a political analyst and former Middle East advisor at the Department of Defense. So this perhaps is for you, sir. Just on Gaza very quickly, I just want to say I do worry that we minimize the impact that it has on Arab American voters, especially since we talked about Michigan, because it's the foreign policy issue that's not just about foreign policy. It's about dehumanization and our value as Americans, as voters, as people who care about issues about international law. I mean, so many sort of tangential issues that I think if Kamala were to try to address those issues, she could be in a way bringing people towards her, even if the Gaza policy itself doesn't change, but by addressing some of these tangential issues, which are important to voters, especially in Michigan. So I'm just wondering if you have thoughts on that. Thank you so much.
Who would like to take that up first?
I'll happily take up
Okay.
the last 2 points. You're both very interesting. I think on sanctions, the US is reaching the limits of what it can do in any case, so I'm not sure it will dramatically change. I guess you could see Trump trying to lift sanctions on Russia, so on, but the US has pushed it even possibly, is my personal view, further than it has legitimacy for example, in the Magnitsky sanctions of a long list of people, individuals it decides to target. So I think it's hard to take it further, and the question is just, does something get repealed? On the Gaza again, well, you were saying again, Arab Americans, and are we understating this? To me, the really fascinating question comes out of the campus riots and the strength of feeling much more broadly than the Arab American community, among many people, many of them young, but not all. Just saying, first we care about this, and then we don't want to be associated with an American policy that supports Israel to this extent. And I guess by implication, which you put in your question, this is not an America that we recognize. We have values. We don't want to be part of that. And that seems to me something that Kamala Harris could play to, because it is, as I said, exactly against what the Trump-Vance proposition sets out to be.
The protest issue is an interesting one too, because it's been quiet because everybody's summer break, but by God, is it about to be unleashed again come after Labor Day in the U.S. when people are back on university campuses, if there's not a deal for the war ceasefire, and any number of events surrounding that. It could become very, very politicized, and it could rise to the fore as a very significant issue. Others want to respond to these questions or any?
I just wanted to respond to the last question, and I was your question, sir. you know, I was in Washington on January the 6th, 2021. I went on the main nightly news for the BBC when the mob still was in control of Congress and Joe Biden's victory had not been certified. And I never thought I would ever find myself speaking about the possibility of American democracy being in trouble, and yet I did that evening, and I don't think it was hyperbole. But I don't want to catastrophize what might happen after an election, because I still think that there is the security forces, the intelligence agencies are much more acute to the danger than maybe they were on January the 6th, 2021. But equally, I am not going to say, oh, it's all fine, don't worry at all. I think America has to be deeply conscious of what happens and what it's going to do and how it maintains order so that there is a peaceful transfer of power. I'd like to play them a video of Rishi Sunak's speech in number 10 Downing Street and Keir Starmer's after the most recent general election here, because there's a lot we get wrong in this country, but by God, it was heartening to see a peaceful transfer of power without incident in this country.
Final comments from you, Peter, or is it definitely going to be Donald Trump?
What's it? I didn't hear the question.
Will it be Trump? Into the conversation, because you never know. Anyway, there's no,
it'll be a dogfight. Trump has.
Sorry, that would still be on the ballot, but I'm not going to raise that.
No, I think you know, the thing is Trump has a low ceiling, and I think the Democrats actually have a high floor. And so I think within that space, it's just going to be tight. And you may not want a race that comes down to a few states, but I think that's where we're headed. What will be interesting is in September, we already know there's two important dates to keep an eye on. So one is September 10th, when Donald Trump is supposed to debate the Democratic candidate. I wonder if he'll take that debate. And secondly, September 18th. That's sentencing day for Donald Trump.
And on that, I mean, what an extraordinary time. It's very good to have this conversation. I suspect that the world of U.S. politics might look actually very different in another 4 or 6 weeks, and we will continue to return to the conversation. Thank you, Heather, Peter, Bronwyn, John, and Tony, who's had to go, and thanks to all of you for joining us, and please keep coming back.
Thank you.